So capitalism has created all these technological advances. And the thing is, you look at communist China is communist, but it has to steal technological development from a capitalist society in order to advance its society. Because on its own, it's not going to develop anything. This is NPR on the media, February 24th of this year. And it kind of speaks for itself, but I do want to comment on it. So Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto, you're going to hear from NPR host Brooke Gladstone. She interviews British author China Miéville about his 2022 book, A Spectre Haunted. By the way, I've never been interviewed about my books by NPR on American Marxism or anything else, and I guarantee you my book sold more than China Miéville's. Go.
This is On the Media. I'm Micah Loewinger.
And I'm Brooke Gladstone. Ooh. So, over the course of a century of what Naomi Oreskes exposed in the previous segment as free market propaganda, there have been periodic spasms of resistance, efforts of the disaffected to rouse themselves from the fever dream.
Well, that's what we need, a roused disaffected. Now, you can hear already from the first sentence or two, right? Free market, trash. And then we have the righteous standing up. Go ahead.
Often, the instrument of that arousal is yet another doctrine, another piece of propaganda, even older than the one it seeks to displace.
On college campuses, a Communist Manifesto is one of the most frequently assigned texts.
Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels' slender volume appeared in 1848. For many of those betrayed by the so-called free market in the years since, the pamphlet has offered refuge, inspiration, and argument. So many arguments still.
In 2012, The Guardian reported on Marx's growing influence and popularity across Western Europe, noting the continued rise in book sales and the incredibly ironic fact that a bank in Germany issued a credit card with Marx's image.
Like Hamlet's ghost.
Right, stop a second. Marx was a slouch. He was lazy. He lived off his father's money. His father was a lawyer in Germany. He spent a lot of time in Britain. Also, Friedrich Engels helped subsidize him. He played the British stock market, believe it or not. He also wrote for a New York newspaper for about 12 years. He was a sit-on-your-ass revolutionary of sorts. His writings and Engels' writings didn't even get popular until about the 1880s, after he died. And it was popularized by radical movements in the United States and others, the so-called progressive era, and in Europe as well. So it's not like this guy wrote this stuff and it took off because it was so brilliant. And virtually everything he wrote was wrong. Marx's entire ideology is based on labor and demand. Demand, that is the redistribution of wealth and labor. Of course, that doesn't work. What about supply? What are you going to redistribute? It was based on materialism, and even the American Marxists have realized everything can't be based on materialism, particularly when you have a vibrant middle class, like in the United States. You'll never have a revolution. We had an industrial revolution. It created this vibrant middle class, and the vibrant middle class is not the proletariat that they thought would overthrow the government. They fight for the country. They go to war for the country. They are the backbone of the country. So it just shows this for the idiotic ideology that it is. But if you're a tyrant, and if you're totalitarian in mindset, this is a beautiful ideology, because you talk about the people and wage gaps, you talk about the inequality of capitalism, which of course is the case, because capitalism is about freedom. And individuals pursue things in different ways. Some are stronger than others, some are more intelligent than others, some are more motivated than others, some work harder than others, some are, poorer than others. You can go on and on and on. And capitalism really isn't a economic philosophy. It just is what it is, right? Somebody didn't sit down and say, this is capital. Capitalism was a natural outgrowth of liberty. And so, but Marxism is not a natural outgrowth. And in fact, Marxism, in part, comes from Hegelism. He's another German who was writing in defense of the Prussian Empire, but he altered Hegelism a bit, and Hegelism in some ways comes from Rousseau. And I don't want to get too deeply into this. If you're really, really interested in it, I wrote a book on it called Rediscovering Americanism and the Tyranny of Progressivism. But all these guys, these three, and he in particular, believe that the only way individual liberty is possible is as part of a group. So we can't really have something called individual liberty. We have to have this part of a group thing. And you can see how this helped the Prussian Empire and so forth. And you can't actually realize the extent of your individualism without being part of the greater good, which is the state. So that's the core of it. And you can see it in Bernie Sanders, and you can see it with the radical Marxists in Congress, and you can see it with the left. This is what they promote. They attack the private sector. They almost never talk about individualism. They have to dehumanize the individual. Everybody's part of a group, a racial group, an economic group, an oppressor group, an oppressed group, and on and on and on. And there are a lot of problems with this ideology, except if you're a tyrant. It's an ideology where you can say you're doing these things for the people, against, business, against the bourgeoisie, and so forth. In fact, they have something that's called racial Marxism. They have something that's called capitalist Marxism. They come up with all these cockamamie ideologies that are sort of sub-ideologies of Marxism that they have tried to apply. And this guy Gramsci in Italy, he's dead and gone, but he was, again, an Italian communist. He and the Frankfurt School, they developed this ideology, Frankfurt School critical race theory, and Gramsci on the evolution of communism by devouring the different cultural institutions of the United States or any democracy and so forth. So these offsprings of Marxism are all out there. And this particular woman, Brooke Gladstone, can mock free market capitalism all she wants. But the prosperity that's been created in the free world, particularly our country, comes from free market capitalism. They hate the Industrial Revolution, does the left. They hate it. They've tried to turn every major industrialist, whether it's Rockefeller or any of them, Mellon, Vanderbilt, just all of them, in Carnegie, we could go on and on and on, into villains, into robber barons. And yet if they hadn't applied the capital to what would become electricity, there wouldn't have been electricity. If they hadn't applied the capital to what would become natural gas and home heating oil and all the rest, we wouldn't have had the automobile and all the other advances that come from the automobile. If we wouldn't have had people complain about processed foods. The reason we had processed foods is because people were dying of stomach cancer and poison because they didn't know how to protect food and get it into metropolitan areas, these very dense cities, keep the food fresh, meats and vegetables and all. So they would use things like turpentine, and they would use wood chips, and they would use all kinds of stuff that caused all kinds of illnesses. So processed foods was actually a brilliant way to feed the people in the inner cities in particular. And it was healthy at the time and safe. Same with fast food. Same with Swanson's frozen food and all the rest of it. All these developments came from that. So capitalism has created all these technological advances. And the thing is, you look at communist China. Communist China is communist, but it has to steal technological development from a capitalist society in order to advance its society. Because on its own, it's not going to develop anything. Same with the Russians. Otherwise, these are destitute, impoverished police states, which is what they create. And whatever, Marxism always brings mass murder. Because you see, if you're an individual and you think individually, you're going against the system, and you are blamed for undermining what what is to be this paradise that they're developing on Earth. And there's always strongmen at the top, whether it's Mao, whether it's Xi, whether it's Stalin and Putin, and whether it's the Castros or whatever. There's always somebody who has to use secret police, the distribution of food and other necessities so you can subsist and live, the distribution of all kinds of power, the use of the military to put down any objections. Look what happened in Cambodia with Pol Pot. He was the purest of the Marxists. And so he literally slaughtered 25% of the entire population of Cambodia. And they're moving people from the cities to the farms, from the farms to the cities. They're closing down colleges and universities. They have people ratting out on their parents and everything else in order to pursue this perfect society. Well, there is no perfect society. The most perfect society is the one you live in right now.
Want to see more Mark Levin? Go to levintv.com and subscribe now.